What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to offer a spoiler-free review for The Monkey, the latest horror movie from director Osgood Perkins. The movie's coming out next week, and it's based on the short story The Monkey from the book Skeleton Crew. And I read Skeleton Crew, back like in the late 80s, and it's one of my all-time favorite collections of horror short stories. It's got The Mist, it's got Survivor Type, it's got The Raft, it's got a ton of short stories that have already been adapted into movies, and now we can add Osgood Perkins' latest movie to the mix of really, really good Stephen King adaptations. And along those lines, because this is a spoiler-free review, and I'm going to struggle to have things to talk about, at the end of the video, I'm going to add a little section where I discuss my all-time favorite adaptations of Stephen King's work. But just to give you my immediate spoiler-free opinion of the film, I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. Maybe I didn't completely, totally, unreservedly love it, but it is very funny, darkly funny, morbidly funny, and it's very short. And it's hard for me to dislike any movie that makes me laugh like hell, and you're in and out in 92 minutes or 93 minutes? It is yet another, or 98 minutes. It is yet another short feature film. And we've been getting lucky recently with a lot of really short feature films. And I don't know what's going on, but between Presence and The Monkey and Flight Risk, even Companion was relatively short at an hour and 45 minutes. We've been getting a lot of thrillers and horror movies that are very tight and economical, and I 100% approve. But for those of you who are not familiar with the original short story, The Monkey by Stephen King, here's the official premise. After stumbling upon their father's vintage toy monkey in the attic, twin brothers Hal and Bill witness a string of horrifying deaths unfolding around them. In an attempt to leave the haunting behind, the brothers discard the monkey and pursue separate paths over time. However, when the inexplicable deaths resurface, the brothers are compelled to reconcile and embark on a mission to permanently eliminate the cursed toy. And I guess in broad strokes, that official premise gets it done, but it doesn't even begin to capture the kind of warped, cynical, evil tone of the movie. But if I were to offer one word of warning or caution about the potential popularity of this movie, my audience last night was freaking out. They were laughing uproariously, having a great time. But these are, the diehard fans that are showing up for an early access screening at the Alamo Drafthouse, where you got Osgood Perkins on the big jumbotron being interviewed afterwards. These are people that are kind of their love and affection for the movie is already kind of baked into the cake. But the movie's quite a departure from the original short story by Stephen King, which I don't necessarily mind, because while I like the short story The Monkey, it's by no means my favorite short story in that collection. And the ending to the original short story, it's fucking weird. It's really strange. It's I like everything about the Monkey short story except for the ending, where it turns into quite a different story. But I don't want to spoil either the short story or the movie here, because I don't want to give anything away, a week and a half before the movie comes out. But if you've read the short story, you'll know the bewildering ending that I'm talking about, where it almost turns into like a late 90s, early 2000s special effects driven event movie, as opposed to a down and dirty, mean-spirited little horror story. But there are plenty of diehard Stephen King fans out there that will resent some of the liberties taken with the story, but it's a very, very slender short story. In order to turn it into a feature film, you have to embellish or flesh out. I'm completely, totally psycho about just adapt the books and keep your own personality out of it. But if you have a 20-page short story, well, then you're going to have to do something in order to flesh it out and make it breathe as a feature film. And usually with Stephen King adaptations, they have the reverse problem, where you're trying to adapt a 1,200-page tome or doorstopper that you could use to bludgeon someone to death, and you're trying to think to yourself, all right, well, what do we need to keep in order to keep the story, the essence of the story intact, and what can we let fall by the wayside? But with short stories, you have the reverse problem. But I think that on the whole, Osgood Perkins did a brilliant job of adapting the best ingredients of The Monkey, apart from the fact that, when I think of that book from the 1980s, I've got a crummy version. I lost my original copy from the 1980s. But that classic image of the monkey with its symbols, I think the monkey needs to have symbols. But in the context of this movie, it's a mix of symbols and drummer. Anyway, it's much more elaborate. He plays the drums, but they're symbols, little mini symbols around the drums, so you still get that sound effect. So some liberties were taken, but also in the short story, the monkey is much more kind of decayed and rotten and falling to pieces and kind of threadbare, whereas in this movie, he's pristine and perfect. So it's a different aesthetic approach. All right, now this is really interesting. I'm reading here on Wikipedia. The original story by Stephen King features a cymbal-banging monkey, but the film replaces the cymbals with a drum. According to Perkins, this change was made due to the rights to the cymbal-banging version of the toy being owned by the Walt Disney Company, as the toy had appeared as a character in Toy Story 3. Jesus fucking Christ. Fuck you, Disney. They should have just given the rights to that fucking cymbal-banging monkey to Perkins and Neon for free, but goddamn, yeah, there's just yet another reason to dislike the Walt Disney Company. They should by no means be able to claim the rights to cymbal-banging monkeys, which I imagine have been around for fucking, hundreds of years, or who knows. I don't know my toy history, but I imagine they were around before fucking Toy Story 3. So I guess I should just be relieved that Osgood Perkins found an interesting creative way to still have the monkey in the movie, even if it has to be quite a different monkey from the original short story. But the one legitimate area where I think there might be some real division in audience members is over the tone, because as I mentioned before, the movie is very funny. It's diabolically funny, like twistedly funny, and there are going to be some people that are just like, is this a horror movie at all, or is it just a really sick and twisted, fucked up comedy? And the answer is, yes to both. It is a horror movie, but Osgood Perkins has taken a story that is very serious and very earnest in its approach, and he's turned it into this kind of sick and twisted dark comedy. I miss dark comedies. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s where we had a lot of sick and twisted dark comedies. And Osgood Perkins, he's only 2 years older than I am. I know he appreciates a good dark comedy, so I like what he has done with it, but I think there are a lot of people out there who just don't like to laugh and don't like comedies, and they're going to resent the fact that this movie's basically like, I wouldn't say like a mockery of the original story, but it's definitely a completely new direction, so you got to embrace your dark side to get on this movie's wavelength. But I think what I liked most about this movie, or what surprised me most about this movie, is how Osgood Perkins was one step ahead of me. Because about the halfway mark of the movie, there was a brief window where I was starting to turn against the movie, where I felt like Osgood Perkins he had lost sight of what are the rules surrounding this monkey and how it manages to kill people by banging on its drums and banging the cymbals in the original source material. And I was like, all right, dude, are you gonna fuck this up? I'm gonna be pissed if you fuck this up. But as it turns out, he was he was crazy like a fox. He was one step ahead of me. He had an additional wrinkle or twist that I did not see coming. I was like, all right, like, bravo, Mr. Perkins. You managed to stick the landing. I lost faith in you, but you managed to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. So if, like me, at any point in the movie, you feel yourself kind of drifting or turning against the movie or becoming skeptical, just be patient and have faith. Osgood Perkins will stick the landing. But the first time I saw the trailer to The Monkey, I knew Osgood Perkins was on the right track when it comes to adapting Stephen King, because he was using the song Let the Good Times Roll by Shirley and Lee, which I first heard in the movie Stand By Me. I played that soundtrack 1,000 times when I was a little kid, so I suspect that Osgood Perkins also fell in love with that soundtrack at that time and wanted to employ that song in this movie as a way of just kind of tipping his hat to one of the best Stephen King adaptations. But aiding and abetting Osgood Perkins in sticking that landing is Theo James in a dual performance as the twin brothers Hal and Bill Shelburne. And up till now, I'd only seen Theo James in White Lotus, where he was hilarious. I mean, for like a year, I kept saying that expression, "Let's fun." And if you've not seen season 2 of White Lotus, definitely check it out. But you will be saying, "Let's fun," after watching that season. And apparently Theo James is incredible in the TV show of The Gentleman. I saw the movie of The Gentleman. I've not seen the show, but my understanding is that The Gentleman was one of the best shows of 2024, so I definitely need to check that out at some point. But what's great about Theo James, even though he's using one of those weird kind of region-free accents that a lot of Brits use when they come over to the States, where you hear them speak and you're like, you know what, you sound kind of sort of American, but I don't know where in America you're from. And this story, like so many of Stephen King's stories, is set in Maine. And I won't claim to have an ear for accents from Maine. I've been to Maine a few times, and it's kind of rural, it's kind of hick, but it's very Maine and very region specific. And it's one of those places where if you stop and ask for directions, they'll tell you things like, oh, you can't get there from here. Like, I don't know if that sentence makes sense, but that is Maine for you. But what's great about Theo James's performance in this movie is how he really gets at the root, or at the core of the love-hate relationship between brothers, in this case, twin brothers, because while brothers can be very close, if they're close in age, they're going to fight, and they're going to fight in just evil ways. And I am a younger brother, and I feel like every younger brother on planet Earth can relate to every other younger brother on planet Earth if they have an older brother that used to psychologically or physically torment them. I mean, my older brother used to do all kinds of fucked up shit. Like the very, very minor stuff would be like in the middle of the night, if he needed to blow his nose, he would just reach over and grab my covers and sheets and throw them back on me. And that is just the beginning of the psychological torture that I suffered at his hands for many, many years. And the characters of Hal and Bill Shelburne in this movie have a very similar, dynamic or dichotomy, and so that I could relate to in a big bad way. So I think either Theo James is an older brother or he's a younger brother, but he really gets that whole relationship. But there's another ingredient about this movie which I love, which comes 100% from Osgood Perkins, not from the original short story. But the second tier and third tier characters in this movie, a lot of them are kind of lovable dumbasses, as you see in the trailer when that priest is like, "Oh, fuck," and doesn't quite know how to handle his duties at a funeral.
Oh, fuck.
There are a lot of characters in this movie that just speak like they wake and bake and they just like rip bong hits all goddamn day. But I don't know how to describe it. They just speak like complete and total stoners without it being an overt stoner comedy. But I was just cracking up because I can remember like in high school and in college when you and your friends are lying around. You're like, "Hey man, like what do I do? I don't know. I got something to eat." Just like you don't have a brain cell left in your skull, but you're still trying to function and communicate. That kind of comedy can be horrible if you don't completely 100% pull it off. But thankfully, Osgood Perkins, he knows whereof he speaks. And he also makes a brief appearance in the movie. And he's fucking hysterical in the movie as well. I wish Osgood Perkins would act more in his movies, but obviously now he is turning into a major up-and-coming director. But it blows my mind just how quickly Osgood Perkins is emerging as a horror superstar. But his career goes all the way back to the early 1980s, where he played the young Norman Bates, the young version of his father, Anthony Perkins, the original fucking psycho for Alfred Hitchcock. He comes from one of those great horror dynasties. But it's funny how he's been acting for so long. He's basically been working as an actor for over 20 years, but now he's suddenly being described as or thought of as like an overnight sensation. But he's like, dude, I was in Legally Blonde and Not Another Teen Movie and all that kind of stuff. But it's funny how, as a director, his work seems to be getting better by leaps and bounds very, very quickly. Because I saw Gretel and Hansel when it came out a couple years ago, and I thought it was pretty cool, but it was nothing that I really went all that crazy about. Then Longlegs emerged as one of like the great like runaway sensations last summer, and in a time where movies are really struggling in terms of declining box office. There are certain horror movies like Longlegs that are just breaking out and overperforming. And it looks like The Monkey is poised to enjoy a similar phenomenon because, like Longlegs, the budget was small. It's budgeted somewhere between 10 and 11 million. But when Neon dropped the trailer, in the first 24 hours, it was watched 43 million times. In over 72 hours, it was seen 100 million times. According to Neon, that is the most watched independent horror film trailer ever. Also, one more thing about Neon. Neon got a lot of credit last summer for basically running this brilliant marketing campaign for kind of really getting people fired up for Longlegs well in advance. Some people say the marketing campaign was even better than the movie. But for the marketing campaign for The Monkey, they've done an interesting thing where I don't know if it's loving homage or ripoff, but they've basically taken the poster from Paul Schrader's film Hardcore and turned it into the poster for The Monkey. And so I guess the question is this a cool tip of the hat to a really cool movie from the late 70s? And if you have not seen Hardcore, brace yourself. It's a wild one. That's Paul Schrader at his most unfiltered and uncompromising. But I guess my perpetual optimism would like to believe that due to that poster, some people will discover Hardcore as a result, and so that's a net win. But some people might say, come up with your own ideas. Stop ripping off the great movies of the past. I don't know whose decision this was, but let's just say I have divided feelings about the poster. I love the fact that they are paying homage to a late 70s classic, but if people are annoyed that it's not original, I get it. But I think if Osgood Perkins can keep his budget small in this movie, there's no reason why he can't continue to have an incredibly prolific career as a director. He's got another movie coming out in October, a movie called, The Keeper. And yeah, he's rapidly becoming one of the most prolific horror directors out there. Maybe he's recognizing, like, my ship is coming in. This is the moment I've been working toward my entire career, and somehow I've gotten lucky where I've struck gold as a director of horror. And so he's just going to start lining up gigs, as they always say, like, line up and arrange your next gig before your previous movie comes out. Because if your previous movie bombs, well, then you at least got the next year or so covered. But yeah, I imagine Osgood Perkins' dance card is going to be very full in the years to come. And whenever movies he wants to make, people are going to be lining up to buy them. Apparently, there's quite a little bidding war between Neon and some other suitors to buy this movie back in May of last year. But I've been going quite a bit at this point without saying anything negative about the movie, so I've got two minor little critiques to offer. My favorite scene from the short story is absent from the movie, and that bothered me. But I guess I can understand because my favorite scene from the short story is really creepy and really disturbing, and this movie's not trying to be creepy or disturbing at all. It's trying to make you laugh at really fucked up shit. And maybe that also is part of my other criticism where the movie, I won't say the movie feels kind of disposable or dismissible, but because it's just trying to make you laugh at increasingly elaborate and just disgusting death scenes. When anytime the monkey starts banging his drums, somebody's going to die in a really elaborate, hysterical way. But you kind of never get to, I guess, feel like completely invested in it emotionally. You will definitely be very entertained by it, and there's something to be said for just unpretentious genre films that want to do nothing apart from just entertain the audience. So for that, standing ovation, it gets the job done. But I don't know if it's going to resonate emotionally with people the way a lot of other Stephen King movies do. And I'm going to get to that, obviously, in my little list that I'm going to do at the end of this video. But from the very first scene onward with the very first kill, and arguably one of the most entertaining kills in the movie, you'll know immediately if this is the movie for you. If you are laughing at the first scene and having a good time, you just sit back and enjoy the ride. This is a movie made for you. If you find yourself kind of frowning in confusion as everybody else laughs around you, if you're not laughing, well, then you might be in for a tough slog. But the good news is it's only 98 minutes, so even if you hate the movie, it's going to be a short evening at the movies. But whatever Osgood Perkins wants to do moving forward, like, sign me up. Anybody who can consistently deliver tight, economical, entertaining movies, or a 98-minute horror comedy that actually makes me laugh, he's got my loyalty for the foreseeable future, and I just wish him and Neon the best of luck. Film culture right now would be so much more boring if we didn't have Neon and A24 producing and distributing all these horror movies out there. Like, if you were to remove horror movies from the equation, the selection at our fingertips would be so grim and so bleak. Horror is the only thing that's kind of keeping my enthusiasm for movies alive right now. We just happen to be living through a really, really good era. But once again, I think the secret sauce is these budgets are down around 10 or 11 million, which allows you to take risks. And for the time being, at least, Osgood Perkins definitely seems to be reaping the benefits of this approach to the horror genre. In any event, that is my review for The Monkey. It is a very, very funny, entertaining adaptation of Stephen King, but it's not my favorite adaptation of Stephen King. We're now going to talk about my top 5 favorite Stephen King adaptations ever. And I started reading Stephen King books in 5th grade with Misery and became a massive fan. Everybody was reading Stephen King in the late 80s. But I've been watching Stephen King adaptations as long as I can remember. I can remember I was spending the night at my grandparents' and I had a babysitter. I was in bed and I wake up in the middle of the night and I can hear her screaming downstairs. So I kind of stumbled down all sleepy. She grabbed me and started hugging me. She was like, stay with me, I'm scared. I was like, huh? She was watching Cujo, and I've actually got a copy of Cujo right here. And yeah, Cujo totally fucked me up, and I was not sleeping after watching the ending to Cujo. But in preparation for this video, I started ransacking my bookshelf for some of my favorite Stephen King books. I've got a few up here. I've got Salem's Lot, The Stand, The Eyes of the Dragon, and Pet Sematary up there because I love Stephen King, and those are some of my all-time favorites. But if I put all my favorite Stephen King books up here, half the bookshelf would be Stephen King. But obviously, I showed you Skeleton Crew earlier. Here are some of the books that I've been hanging on to for decades, like my original copies from the 80s. But I got Dead Zone, Carrie, The Shining, Firestarter, and Christine. As you can tell, they are well loved and well thumbed and kind of beaten to death. And a lot of the books I've just lost over the years and have had to replace. So I've got crummier versions of the paperbacks, but different seasons, aka Stand By Me and Shawshank Redemption. And here's It, Night Shift, The Gunslinger, and The Drawing of the Three. I've lost my copy of Wizard and Glass, which I really, really like, or at least I like the middle portion. And if you ever want to read Stephen King's book about his love of horror shows and movies and fiction, Danse Macabre is well worth a read. Long story short, I love reading Stephen King, but I'm primarily a big, giant movie freak. So now we're going to go chronologically or sequentially through my 5 favorite because I don't have it in me to rank them.
The girl no one likes.
We're all sorry about this incident, Cassie.
It's Carrie!
So first up, Brian De Palma's adaptation of Carrie, one of the most entertaining movies that I've ever seen, which I've watched many, many, many times over, and I've used it as like as an evil trick to be played on my little brothers. I have a lot of family members who are considerably younger than I am. So I have one brother who's 12 years younger, where when we were watching Carrie, he was kind of like lying next to me because he was scared, and as we got toward the end of the movie, when the arm comes out of the ground, it was like somebody had put like electric shocks or plugged nodes onto him, and he just went, he started like, I'll never forget, he just started like thrashing in total terror. And then years later, yet another younger brother who's 26 years my junior, I kept telling him that the movie was basically like all the scary parts were over and that he could relax. And he was sitting up close to the screen. Once again, the arm came out and his jaw just slowly dropped, and he went, "Oh my fuck!" But he was paralyzed with fear. So Carrie, it has not lost an ounce of its punch after all these decades, and it's a strong contender for my all-time favorite Stephen King adaptation. But of course, we can't have this conversation without mentioning Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining, which Stephen King famously hated and resented because of all the changes made. So he and Mick Garris made a TV show of The Shining many years later. And it's a strong contender for the worst TV show ever made. So I'm thrilled that Stephen King got to have his faithful, loving adaptation of his book. But the reality is, in 2025, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is more popular and more famous than Stephen King's The Shining. And that's very, very rare. Usually people always say, oh, well, the movie's fine, but the book was better. I think most people who love The Shining, apart from author Bret Easton Ellis loves The Shining. And at the time of the release of the movie, he really struggled with it because he was already a fan of the book. I saw the movie many times before I finally read the book. So I think that's why I have an easier time accepting all the massive changes. But name me a movie that's more entertaining than The Shining. I mean, Jack Nicholson, like Wendy, like light of my life. I mean,
Wendy, stay away! Darling, light of my life. I'm not gonna hurt you. You didn't let me finish my sentence. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in.
I mean, all that stuff. It's just, it's evil, and it's great, and it's one of the great horror classics. But if we're going to talk about Stanley Kubrick's handling of Stephen King, we also must include David Cronenberg's handling of Stephen King with The Dead Zone, which is kind of one of those secret dark horse candidates for one of Cronenberg's best movies, but people don't talk about it as much because it's not as personal. It's not as personal as Videodrome. It's not as personal as Dead Ringers. It's not an original story, but it is a damn good adaptation. And Christopher Walken, he holds nothing back. I mean, it's now turned into like an internet meme, that scene where he's like, the ice is gonna break, but the whole goddamn movie works perfectly.
Now, don't give me any argument. The ice is gonna break!
I remember when I first saw it, I was like, this is like the best like unofficial X-Men movie ever made, where a guy has a near-death experience and it develops the ability to kind of, read the future by touching things. And it's just flawlessly executed. And Martin Sheen as the future megalomaniac, basically like, tyrant who's going to bring about World War III. That's some of the best work that he ever did. It's a much more interesting version of the president than we saw in West Wing. But yeah, The Dead Zone, I've seen it I don't know how many times, and each time I see it, I fall in love with it all over again. And my last two favorites both come from the same book, different seasons, which is 4 different novellas. But Stand By Me, based on The Body, is one of my childhood favorite movies. And I was just young enough where I saw it, where the kids were just a little bit older. I was like, oh my God, like these are the cool kids. These are the kids I look up to. The fact that they were like, smoking and cussing, I was like, wow, like, are we allowed to be watching this, or are they allowed to be talking like that? But it just felt so cool and rebellious, and it features all the classic Stephen King kind of greaser punks from the 1950s that pop up in so many of his stories. Whether they're talking about Christine, or hell, even The Monkey has like a 2025 like rendition or version of the greaser punks that just like they're so evil and so fucked up. They're not just like guys who like working on their cars and that sort of thing. Like they're usually really violent and depraved. The book It has a bunch of those punks as well. In any case, the best versions of those punks are played by Kiefer Sutherland in Stand By Me, but I just fucking love Stand By Me. It has so many moments that are just like, etched into my brain, from Lardass starting that vomiting epidemic at the blueberry pie eating contest, or the scene with the leeches, like we hear Corey Feldman go, leeches! Like,
yeah, right, I'm not falling for that one a chance.
No, Vern, there is something on your neck.
It's a leech. Leeches! Oh my God!
Anyway, it's pure solid gold entertainment, and it holds up very well. And I think it's an easy contender for Rob Reiner's best movie, apart from perhaps maybe This Is Spinal Tap. And my last, The Shawshank Redemption, based on Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. Everybody always thinks that it's Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, but it's Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. But this is a movie where it kind of came and went and didn't make a huge impression initially, except with a few people. And then on VHS and then DVD and cable, it started to gain a whole new following. I didn't see it initially upon its release when it came out.
Mr. Hadley, do you trust your wife?
Oh, that's funny. You're gonna look funnier sucking my dick with no teeth.
But when I finally did see it, I was like, whoa, this packs a punch. But I think, depending upon, I haven't checked lately, but actually, let's go ahead and check. On IMDb, there have been times where on IMDb, it is the highest rated movie ever made, which might sound a little insane, but it just means, it's a big, fat, giant crowd pleaser. And boom, there it is. It is still number one after all these years, ahead of The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, and 12 Angry Men is number 5. That's incredible. I love 12 Angry Men. I've seen it many times. Blows my mind that it's ranked number 5 on this list. Yep. It's always interesting when you kind of come head to head with just pure, raw audience feedback. Ooh, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is ranked number 10. I definitely approve of that. In any case, The Shawshank Redemption, the highest rated movie ever made on IMDb, and I guess that speaks volumes, but the movie works, irrespective of ratings or reviews or whether it was a success or not at that time. It's definitely, I think, the most emotional movie ever adapted by a Stephen King story. And, I mean, I've seen people, break into just, Niagara Falls, tears running down their face while watching this movie. It's an incredibly powerful experience. And if you've never seen it, well, the good news is you still have arguably the most popular movie ever made still in front of you to be enjoyed. So The Monkey's got a lot of stiff competition when it comes to, how does it rank next to all the other great Stephen King adaptations. It is not going to disrupt my top 5, but if you look at my honorable mentions for Stephen King adaptations, movies like Creepshow or Pet Sematary or Christine or whatever, I think The Monkey will compete just fine alongside some of the other honorable mentions when it comes to adaptations of Stephen King. So that's all I've got for you for now. Hope you enjoyed this little, appendix to my overall review. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I look forward to hearing what everybody thinks about the movie when it comes out next week. But thanks so much for watching. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.